Reade Harpham is an industrial designer who learned early on in his career how to communicate with engineers. Here's a hint: use numbers. This skill allowed him to earn the respect of engineering teams because he was able to communicate in a way that allowed engineering teams to fully understand and appreciate the value that his human factors team brings to the table. He's also helped develop and foster an incredible work environment at Priority Designs. You should check out their website. It's an impressive firm. What you're about to hear is an insightful and fascinating discussion with someone who empowers his team members to get stuff done without the bureaucracy of traditional organizations. So sit back as we revisit Aaron's chat with Priority Designs' Reade Harpham.
Welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast. Our guest today is Reade Harpham. Reade is a product designer who has spent much of his career working in the healthcare and medical device space, but has also been deeply involved in consumer and industrial markets as well. Prior to his role, his current role, he held titles from industrial designer to director of human-centered design, and currently serves as a senior medical device specialist at Priority Design. Reade, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So one of our former podcast guests introduced us, and I've been going through your LinkedIn profile and looking at the company Priority Designs, the company at which you work, and super excited to talk to you. I've got all kinds of questions that I just want to pick your brain about. To start with, I'm going to ask what made you decide to get into the product design space? What made you decide to become a product designer?
It's kind of a cool story. So when I was a kid, I built model cars all the time. And I can remember when I was a sophomore in high school, there was some assignment that was like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And so I looked around for jobs that I could do that would let me build models. And I would age myself, but it was right when Star Wars came out, I think it was Empire Strikes Back came out. And I was so enamored with the models and stuff that they used that I thought, I want to build models for movie sets. My father, who is an architect, said, you should look into industrial design because it's kind of a little bit of both. You can use some art, you can use some engineering, and you can use some, you can do model building. It's all sort of encompasses that. And so I looked into it. Ohio State at the time happened to be, a really great school when I was able to go. And so, I just I literally stumbled into it. But as soon as I got into it, as soon as I did some research and got into the school and some of the preliminary classes, I thought this is amazing. you get to see things, come up with ideas and watch them go, come to fruition. It was just, it was mind blowing, and I've loved it ever since.
Tell me a little bit more about your experience with Star Wars. I want to hear about this. I was born in 79, and I think maybe that's the year the first Star Wars came out. So I didn't have the experience of watching this and just being blown away because it was so drastically different and innovative as far as, special effects, visual effects. What was that like when you watched it?
I was probably too young to pay attention to all of the stuff that was going on, but it was just everything about it. The story, at the time, the visuals were, there's a giant Wookiee, there's a giant furry animal talking.
Okay, so you said that you're passionate about integrating end user insights into the product development process. Can you share maybe a few examples of when and how you've been able to do this effectively?
Early in my career, one of the things I worked at a large R&D company, and it was a lot of technology push. So we were developing some pretty amazing new to the world technologies. And I can remember watching those technologies in some cases fall short because the people who were intended to be using those technologies, they weren't really designed for those people. So I can remember on a number of occasions, from surgical tools to things like clinical analyzers, being able to be the voice of the user in the process. And for example, you had a system that comes to mind is one that the technology allowed throughput of slides to be like triple the technology itself, triple what it could do today. But the way the system was designed, the users couldn't even put enough slides in
What
the
kind of
system.
slides are you referring to?
These were pre-made microscope slides.
Okay, so they're putting these slides under a microscope and analyzing it, and then moving on to the next slide.
Well, that's the way they used to do it. This system actually, you took what was so groundbreaking about the system is it was an imaging system, and the user would pipette out a sample, put it in a little vial, and then put the vial in a rack into the system. So it was expediting the reading of these things, and the system could do some ridiculous amount of readings per minute or per hour. But while the technology was amazing, the actual Achilles heel of the system was that the user was unable to put enough or unable to make enough samples, prep enough samples in time to fill the system. So, to me, that was one of the biggest and earliest moments where I was like, this is technology is great, but if you have to have a user involved in the process, then you need to give equal opportunity to the user to have inputs to the system. And that's sort of the foundation of where I started with this, passion about making sure users are involved and their voices are heard and they're being thought about throughout the process.
And how do you go about doing that? How do you decide at the beginning of a project, okay, we're going to do, X, Y, and Z to make sure that the user's voice is heard and we don't end up with a fantastic technology that no one can use?
So at the time, it was just being loud, obnoxious about it. It was back before the FDA really came down on human factors and incorporating human factors into the process, like you do other, as a risk assessment, risk mitigation. So prior to that, it was just like, getting invited to the table and being a champion for the users to let the teams know that this technology is great, but if the users can't use it, then it's pretty much useless. And so, the role is to allow the users to have input, but also let this technology live up to its expectation. So just from the very beginning, letting people have a voice and going and making the assumption, I don't know what a user needs, and going out and talking to them, interviewing them, watching what they do, getting that knowledge, and then communicating that knowledge back to the team, or having those insights and inputs as part of the early development process, which is another benefit of being invited to the table early is you get to have impact before things are too set in stone. Before people are already so far down the path of development that a what seems to be a minor change actually is a major change because you're so far down the path.
I really like that example. Be loud and obnoxious. That's a great way to put it. And that every team needs a champion, right? A champion for this stuff. Otherwise, it's just not going to get done. I'm curious when you or your teammates were the champions for these human factors items. Did you ever get pushback from other members on the team? Maybe they're like the project manager or, some dense mechanical engineer. Who needs those guys? Where they were like, yeah, Reade, that's cool. I mean, I get it, but that's kind of, touchy-feely stuff. We don't really need to worry too much about that.
All the time.
Really?
Yeah.
I kind of didn't think that was going to be the answer. Okay.
Well, so, this was a while ago. When I first started in this business, it was 95. So at the time, there was a lot of pushback. And people, what I realized while working with engineers, and this is a really important learning for me, was to know your audience. So, at the time, I was a obnoxious designer, and I was on a project, and I was like, no, this is what you guys need to do because the users need it. The users want to feel empowered to use it. And they're like, the information you're giving me is useless. The feeling that I got was they didn't appreciate the insights, or they didn't think that research was, that we were doing was important and valuable. What I learned after working with engineers for a while is that engineers just wanted to know what their constraints were so they could solve these problems. And so as soon as I recognized that, and I recognized that the engineering team was actually my user set and not the patients, once I realized the engineers were the users of my outputs, the story changed. And so rather than say to them, hey, this product needs to empower the user, I was able to say, this device needs to have a textured handle to allow the user to grab it with wet hands and not have it slip out. That gave them a framework and a target. And once I changed my frame of mind and how I presented these things and the way I presented to the development teams the user needs, it completely changed the game with how we approached it.
That's a huge insight right there. So the information, the research that you and your team was doing was super important and valuable, but the engineers didn't recognize that because it wasn't being presented in terms that they understood. It wasn't being presented in like an engineering requirement form. That's what you're saying, right?
That is correct. And what's so ironic about that, and I still see it happening sometimes, is that you get design teams, industrial design teams or research teams who are so adamant that they understand the users, but they don't understand their audience, which in essence are their users. So you get these notions of unusable requirements. And so once you recognize that the people who have to use your outputs are engineers and they want requirements, that you change the way you present it.
And speaking as an engineer, I can see how, like, if a designer told me, okay, this device has to feel good to the user to hold, I'd be like, what is good? I don't know what that is. And it's going to be more trouble to try and figure out what good means than it is to just kind of sweep it under the rug and do my thing. But if I hear, okay, this, the handle has to be a durometer between, this and that, short A, and it needs to have, bumps of this size spaced at this spacing, then I'm like, oh, I get that. Sure, I can do it, no problem. And that makes it really easy for me as an engineer to implement that. So that's a huge insight. I mean, it comes down to communication, right? Like so many things.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. I mean, it's just recognizing your audience and knowing how to communicate. And the other thing is not, in the early days when I would get the feedback of, okay, thanks, but no thanks, or great, this is not very helpful. I always thought it was that they didn't appreciate what we were doing. And when I realized, was that we weren't communicating on the same level and in the things that they needed to hear. So, once I did that, their expectation and their desire to do these things was right there. They just needed to target, and my job was to give it to them.
Wow, that's great. I love that. Okay, something else you've said is that you strive to help healthcare clients find balance between technology and humanity. And this might come down to kind of the same thing that we're just talking about, but I thought that was a really interesting statement and wondered, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, what do you mean specifically when you say humanity?
Basically, it's people's ability to do what you want the technology to do for them. There's nothing more disappointing than, we talked about this a little bit earlier, an amazing technology that falls flat because the user or the end user of that technology, the end recipient of that technology, either doesn't need it or know how to use it, or wants to use it, but it's too hard to use. So, in my past, in working in environments where you're developing new to the world technology, understanding the end user and making sure that what we were providing to them was relevant was key. And also, going the other direction, making sure that everything isn't equal. So the users, I would argue that some types of pumps should not be easy to use, because if it's easy to use that a child can use it, they might hurt themselves. So the whole notion of, it's got to be easy to use, it's actually not true. You have to find this balance between who are the users, what's the technology enables them to do, what do you want the technology to do, and find that balance between, allowing users to use the technology to its full potential, but also allowing the technology to not sort of bend the users to its will.
I get it. That makes a lot of sense. Matching the technology to the user as opposed to just always needs to be easy to use. That's an interesting point. I can't recall hearing it put quite that way. But like a pill bottle, right? Same thing. You don't want a pill bottle, but it be super easy to open, or else little kids can open it and get themselves sick. Great insight. Yeah. Okay. So you're working at Priority Designs right now, which is a really cool product design, product development company. We're going to get into that in a little bit. We're going to travel back in time just a little. And you spent I think it was about 16 years working at a company called Battelle, which is, I hadn't heard of them before. But they seem like a pretty big company. And now I'm kind of embarrassed for not knowing who they were, but apparently the world's largest nonprofit independent R&D organization. So I'd love to hear a little bit about Battelle and like who are their customers and what is unique about the experience of working at a company that at a engineering or R&D company that is a nonprofit? Like, what about that nonprofitness makes it interesting or unique?
Yeah, well, it's Mattel is, it's the biggest company that nobody knows about.
Okay, thanks for making me feel better.
No, really, everybody had that same reaction. What's unique about Battelle is it's a non-charitable trust. So it was started in 1920 something, 28, I think, by the will of Gordon Battelle and his mother. And it was founded to advance technology and civilization through technology advancement and technology discovery. So its fundamental purpose in life is to develop technologies and advance them for the greater good. And it worked in all kinds. I mean, it works in every area you can imagine. I was in the medical device group and was there for my entire career at Battelle, but they do a lot of government work. They do a lot of healthcare work. How you might have heard of them lately is they recently developed a container system that cleans N95 masks, and they got approval for it from the FDA in like really, record time. I'm not sure the current status of it, but it was these big containers that they basically drop shipped to these hospitals and were able to recycle and reuse and clean N95 masks. So for me, what was amazing about that company and working for that company was, the story, the people behind it, what it meant to the community. Part of being a nonprofit is you take some of the profits that you make and you give it to the communities in which you serve, which is part of the trust, part of the will. And so that was sort of the driving force. The other thing was the people who worked there and the technologies that we worked on were so far ahead of their time. I mean, it's hard to remember, or it's hard to realize when you're there in the moment. The things that you are looking at are 5-10 years away from being in the market sometimes. And you're just there because it's just normal. It's like, oh, everybody gets to deal with this kind of technology. And then you step out of it. I left Battelle, I think almost 5 years ago. You step out of it and you look back and you're like, oh man, that stuff was amazing. It's sort of the big R research, and where, Battelle managed the national labs. And so there's a lot of fundamental technology thinking going on. And the group that I was in, the product development, and then medical device group, we helped translate the big R to the R&D, and we worked with commercial clients mostly to help them either create technologies for new medical devices or develop their own medical devices. But yeah, for me, it was as a freshly minted graduate in design, thinking I was the best thing ever and on top of the world and I knew all the answers, to go into such a storied engineering company and get schooled pretty quickly on the fundamentals of engineering and physics and all the things that you really can't change. It gave me an incredible appreciation for that technology field, R&D, and sort of the give and take you have to have, but also gave me a chance to, as we talked about earlier, communicate to people the value of the human insight, the human input into this system.
Is Battelle kind of like a university in that there's a lot of R&D going on, but maybe not much commercialization, or are they doing the commercialization as well?
It's a little bit of both. So it has elements of university where there's some fundamental research going on. It has elements of commercialization where they're sometimes developing their own internal technologies and either licensing them or developing products that have that embedded in it. And then they're doing a lot of commercial work. So it really, it exposed me personally to a lot of different areas. For the most part, it's probably, they probably do some more research and development than actual commercialization of their own and of their own products. I mean, when I say development, it's product development for outside commercial partners.
So I've heard of course, nonprofits that are focused on, I don't know, for lack of a better word, charities. But R&D, I would never put R&D into that bucket of a charity. I mean, this is business. We're developing technologies that are going to be commercialized and pushed out into all these different markets. What was the culture like there at Battelle? Did you get a sense that like people weren't, I don't know, it sounds bad to say it this way, but as driven because it was a not-for-profit, or was that just not an issue at all? And maybe people were more driven because they were there because more of a sense of purpose than of economic value.
Well, it's all the above. So what the financial people at Battelle would tell you is that we are, Battelle is a not for loss. If
Okay.
Battelle doesn't make a profit, they can't distribute those profits to the community.
Yeah.
And so there is incentive to, not financial incentive, but there is, incentive to make a profit so you can give back to the communities that they serve. And that was the motivation for the people who worked there. Not only was it amazing, super deep technical work and challenging technical work, it was also the benefits of that work to humanity and the people who, to the world at large, and that the outputs that people worked on, not only from a technology standpoint to help people, but the profits that Battelle made would go out to the communities. There's some people who live in Columbus who will hear this. There's a number of Battelle, Battelle Park and Battelle Hall. There's a lot of places where Battelle donates their dollars and their time, volunteer time, in the communities. And that was a motivation for people, over and above just the amazing technologies that people get to work on.
Wow. How interesting. That's fascinating. You've traveled for work, apparently, doing speaking engagements. Yes. Okay. A resounding yes. All over the world. A couple places I read about were the Arctic Circle of Finland and the shores of Lake Victoria in Uganda. I mean, just reading those names, that conjures up images of grandeur. Well, how has traveling the world and experiencing some of these different societies and cultures affected the way that you think about the world and your role within it as a designer?
So I have traveled throughout, but had the opportunity to travel a lot in my career. Even before I had a job, I spent some time studying in Finland and working at a small design consultancy in Germany. And the first thing it taught me, I think, is anybody who travels a lot knows that the world is small and people are a lot alike all over the world. So that was sort of for somebody who's never traveled outside the United States as a kid, it was really important for me to learn that lesson, that we are all similar in a lot of ways. Just happened to be living in different parts of the world. But I remember specifically a moment when I was in Finland with one of my roommates that somebody made a joke and that we laughed at the joke, and it was this. And what became so acutely aware to me is that humor in that scenario, humor was universal. We come from different cultures with different backgrounds and different ways of thinking, but we all thought the same thing was funny. So that was an eye opener for me at how common, in some cases, we all are. Fast forward from those experiences, and after living there and traveling around, fast forward to my career, my ability to travel overseas and have overseas clients and do it with confidence because I've been there and I understand, just the simple things of how to get around, but also the more nuanced things of how potentially interact with different cultures and those types of things. I mean, it was incredibly important to me as a person, but also in a career. And from a designer, sort of all stemming back to there's a common theme in things that people want and need, and there are nuances to different cultures, but for the most part, you can find probably a trace of similarities across many things. I had an opportunity to do some work with the Gates Foundation in my past, and that's what took me to Uganda. To me, that was mind blowing because the not only the opportunity and the ability to affect so many lives that the project would allow, but just getting to know different cultures and the different amounts of need that sub-Saharan Africa has, when it comes to healthcare and prevention of disease. To me, it was a complete shift in how I thought about my role and my ability to give back to the world as a designer and a developer. It's what part of the reason why I shifted all into medical and away from consumer, because medical to me has a fundamental good about it. You're doing the work because you want people to help people get healthier or better. So that was part of my all in when it comes to medical, focusing on medical work.
You had mentioned earlier, or not during this podcast, but you have mentioned philanthropic design. Does that philanthropic design tie into some of the experiences like you had at Uganda, but just realizing that not everyone has the same very high level of healthcare that we have here in the United States and many other places in the world. But how does that philanthropic design tie into some of these experiences?
It made me think about, some entities give their money, and some entities give their skills, and it really made me start thinking about the notion of skills volunteerism, and that, if I were to write somebody a check for $100, it would go so far, but I could potentially give a lot more value if I could help somebody who's developing a product for sub-Saharan Africa, or, even in the US. If I could donate my time and my knowledge, to me, that was much more valuable than just writing checks or donating money. And so that's when that's sort of philanthropic design of the notion of skills volunteerism, where, you're really donating your unique capabilities and your unique perspective to people who can't necessarily afford it or know they need it. Some companies that we worked with in the past, they couldn't afford to use a large R&D company, but they still needed our help nonetheless. And so it's where you start to think about, hey, maybe we should start to donate our skills and our capabilities more than just our dollars.
It sounds like you've had the opportunity to do that. Was that at Battelle, or has this been at PD as well, or where have you been able to exercise that philanthropic design?
So it was while I was at Battelle, and it was inspired by Battelle, but at the time it was not endorsed by Battelle, and that's a whole nother podcast. But so it was inspired by the notion to do good things, and so the work that we were doing was engineering. The specific project that we worked on was a grain thresher that helped people get higher yields out of small farms in Mali. Was the specific case that we were working on, and that just was from that was a random chance meeting I had with somebody who was a volunteer group who came out of General Mills when I was at some trade show in Minneapolis. It was one of those ridiculous moments in life where all these things come together and everything just sort of happens. So we created a little small, it was a nonprofit. It was called One Lab. And the goal was for us to donate our skills and capabilities to help these major problems across the world. And so myself and a couple other guys from Battelle got together, and we went to a local fab lab and, hammered out a portable grain thresher that one of my colleagues packed in a suitcase and took with him to Mali and twice, and did some testing. And it inspired a couple of other nonprofit little spin outs to do their own thing. And it was really fun for me to see that happen. And that's where I kind of got my first taste of the power of being able to donate your skills to these kinds of problems. So yeah, that's really where I sort of got the eyes on.
That's fantastic. Thinking about putting a prototype in a suitcase and taking it, halfway across the world. That's not an opportunity that most of us get to have. How rewarding.
Yes.
All right. So next question. Reade, you work now at Priority Designs, PD, and to be honest, I have a little bit of a crush on Priority Designs. I looked at the website, and PD, you guys are legit. This, what I see on the website anyway, this is what I think of when I was a college student, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to work for a product development company. I'm going to design new products. What I see on the PD website, that's what I thought of. You guys are vertically integrated. You got design and engineering and soft goods and research and software. It looks like you do it all, and I kind of have a crush on PD. So not
fair.
It is fair. Thank you. Not many product development firms get to kind of the scale and the level of capability that PD has. Maybe can you share a little bit about why do you think that Priority has enjoyed the success that it has? What are you guys doing so well?
So let me first start by saying I shared and share your crush, and here's why. So when I was in college, PD was I was Priority's first intern they had back when they were a small, it was a company of 4 people in a garage. And I stayed there for a bit, and then I left and had a career, went to Battelle and had a career there, and always admired the way PD operated and the way they personality and their presence and just the things that they did cool design, and they seemed like they had a good time. So 5 years ago, when I left Battelle to go to PD, to go back to PD to help them, focus on and build up their med device capabilities. From the outside, it looks one way, and then when you get inside, it's exactly as you would have expected it to be. It is probably the most authentic place I have ever worked.
Wow.
One of the things that to me really allows us, and again, coming from a large organization where there was a lot of hierarchy and a lot of structure, and there was a lot of layers you had to go through. PD, and I'm now convinced there after being there for 5 years, PD is a flat org. We're a flat structure. We have 4 principals, and then there's everybody else, and everybody is equal. And to build on that, it's now, the last 2 years, it is an ESOP. So it is an employee-owned flat structure. And what that does is it gives everybody the autonomy to make the right decisions for the client and make the best decisions for the client in mind. It helps us be nimble and quick in how we react. It helps us think differently about a way we want to approach something. It gives everybody from a junior designer all the way up to a senior engineer, everybody has equal say at the table. So you have, and I've heard this a number of times from new staff that come in and they're like junior designers and they are on the first phone call with the client. And when we ask them a question, they're chiming in, and they never would have been able to do that at another company because, you have to go to the account manager or the senior designer or the design director. And it just doesn't allow for this open and organic communication. The other thing that we do so well that I've seen over in my time there, because of that flat structure and because of that motivation to just do cool work and have a place for people to go that they enjoy, we've been able to grow into new places organically. There is no, you're going to have 30% year-over-year growth and we're going to get into this space and we're going to make this much money in the space. We don't work like that. We grow organically into, it started as a design firm with designers, and then it grew into engineering because our clients needed engineering. And then we started doing some soft goods work for sporting goods, and then soft goods work turned into wearable medical devices, and medical devices, expanded as you could imagine. And then when I joined, coming from Battelle and working in a place that had these multidisciplinary teams, but still had the bureaucracy of a large behemoth organization. And I came to Priority, and it was like somebody gave me the keys to a race car. I mean, all of this capability, all of this interest, all of this knowledge and capabilities and the building and the machines we have, and then we could move.
Let me ask you a little bit about the flat hierarchy or structure at Priority, because I love that setup. That's my preferred way to work. And I've talked to other design firms that they started out, they're kind of small, maybe 5, 10, 15 people, and they did the flat structure, and that worked great. But as they grew, as they got, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, it was really hard to maintain that flat structure. And I think Priority, you guys are 50, 60 people, something like that?
Yeah, we're 65, pushing maybe almost 70. Close to 70 probably.
Okay. So how have you been able to maintain that flat structure with so many people?
So it's interesting. We've just gone through when we became an ESOP. In the company, we all became employee owners. One of the things that was, one of the reasons for that was the founders of the company, Paul and Lois Collada. They're ready to move on. So in the next 5 years, they're probably going to retire, and they wanted to sell the company, but they didn't want to. At the time, a lot of design firms were being snapped up by large companies like I think Lunar was purchased by McKinsey, and you had these huge companies who knew design was a relevant thing. And they knew there was value, and they wanted to buy versus build. So they went out and they snapped up these companies. I mean, there was a period of time when there was like in the news every couple of weeks there was a large design firm that was being purchased. Paul and Lois recognized that probably wasn't, because of our culture, that wasn't going to be a good fit. They didn't think, nor did they hear any feedback from those companies who had been purchased, that it was good to their culture to be snapped up by a large company, because then you inevitably became, people started watching you a little more closely, and there were some rules you put in, and the other option was to shut it down, and that didn't make any sense. So as part of the ESOP, where you sell, you basically sell the company to the employees. Paul part of what's happening is that we're putting in an unstructured structure. I know that sounds stupid, but it's loosely based on the notion of a holacracy, where we have now, and we just did this at the beginning of the year, and the pandemic, hasn't messed with this at all. Whatever, it's kind of wreaked havoc with it, but we have in essence what are circles, and it's not circles in the Zappos way. It's not that defined, but it's like we have capability areas. So we have a UX team and a research team and an engineering team and a soft goods team. And within that group are people who spend 60-70% of the time in that space. A lot of people cross over. We have designers who are in UX. We have HF who do UX work, and so on and so forth. But in these circles, each circle has what we call category leads or category points. And those are 2 to 3 people in the circle who have been chosen by their peers to represent their capability to the larger group. And it's not a managerial position. You don't have any managerial responsibilities. Like, you don't get to judge somebody whether they're doing this or doing that. You are, in essence, facilitating that, making sure that things are going as they should, and that the voice of those team members are being heard. And that's a rotating role. So there isn't anybody who's going to be in that role for more than a year at a time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Right. And so what that does is it gets rid of anybody who might be, not everybody is a good manager, not everybody's a good communicator, and that's fine. Got to play to people's strengths. Some people might not be comfortable in that role because in some cases you have to have challenging conversations with staff and with clients. And sometimes, you're responsible for making the ultimate decision on something, and some people don't like that, that accountability.
Yeah.
But what we're hoping is that it will give people a chance to be in this role. It'll give people a chance to learn how to communicate with them, with others and their team. And it sort of builds to this notion that we all are part of the same entity and we all have equal input. And there's a managerial team. There's a serious set of principals, for 4 of us who oversee kind of the day-to-day operations, of the company, but we don't really have any kind of heavy hand in it. We just sort of, I'm a principal, but I also do a lot of research and project management. So it's not like I'm sitting there in my office, running numbers on a spreadsheet. So everybody's actively involved in all of the way the business runs.
So there's still, traditional project managers. It's not like, teams are managing themselves. There is a project manager for a project. Is that accurate?
In some cases, yeah, and not in all cases. So, we do programs that range anywhere from $5,000 to, a couple $1 million. And we can be profitable with a $5,000 project because of our structure, because we don't have a lot of overhead, and we don't have, we have people who can manage projects. We don't have PMPs. We don't have professional project managers, but we don't necessarily need them because our programs and our clients don't require them. So some programs are self-managed. If you're a senior person on a small program, you can manage yourself. You don't need somebody, pushing you to do something. A couple of the larger programs we've had in, we've just brought in the last couple of months, honestly, they require by necessity a full-time project manager. One of the programs I'm on for the next 12 months, and I'm the full-time PM, but it's because there's it's a full-scale product development, medical device development activity that's 12 months long, and there's a lot of things going on, and you just, I'm there to provide cover fire, to allow the teams to do what they do without having to deal with the minutia of making sure we're on budget and making sure, we've got scheduled with the other PM and we were trying to find times for meetings. It's just mechanics of a large program. So it depends on the program. But a lot of the time, I think for most, probably 75% of the projects, you have a project manager, but it's not a formal role. It's like a senior designer who's overseeing the program, running the numbers and doing the books and, in billing, but also providing inputs and guidance to some of the junior members who might be on the team and, working on the program themselves. We don't have the structure, and we want to keep our overhead low. So we don't have a bunch of PMs who all they do is project manage.
Okay. And in the cases where there's more this like senior design lead, is that individual also the one who's kind of assigning tasks to the team and making sure that, this task got done? Okay, what's next? Let's move on to this part. Yeah.
So right now, for example, we have on one of our programs, we have a human factors tech lead, a mechanical engineering tech lead, and a design tech lead. And pretty soon we're gonna add the UX UI tech lead. And those people are you look at the RACI chart, those people are accountable for the quality of the deliverables that are on that program.
Okay.
And they are working with their, the team. It's not their team. They're not, they don't have anybody who reports to them, but they're working with the design team that they and we all have assembled, and they're making sure that everybody, they're getting inputs and saying, what if we did this? And they're assigning, in some cases, tasks, but it's playing to people's strengths. It's not, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. It's basically, okay, we have these 3 prototypes to build, a mechanical one here, and this is more of a user interface. Who wants to work on what things, and helps people play to their strengths. So it's a lot more facilitation than it is direction. Again, I think that goes to our ability to be a flat structure and to be a very efficient flat structure.
Do you think that works for most any engineer, designer, team member, or has PD had to kind of find the right people that are able to work in an environment like that?
It's absolutely had to find the right people. I can't tell you the number of people we've interviewed who have left saying, I don't know how you guys get anything done. I don't know. And even honestly, I myself, when I started, it was like, this is like a free range. This is a bunch of free range designers. How does anything get accomplished?
It's the Wild West out there.
Right. So it's Wild West. What are you guys doing? But you just have to, you have to be comfortable in that. And it's not like we're just a bunch of people bumping into walls. We get stuff done, and we get it done well. And after a while, you understand the heartbeat and the pulse of the company. Some people absolutely thrive in it. They come in and they're like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. I find that happens when people who have been somewhere else first, and they come in and they recognize, wow, this place allows you to do amazing things, and you get to do them the way you want to do them with support from this incredible network of people. And people who are more junior, they don't know any different. So they're like, this is cool.
Yeah.
This place is great. What I find, and this is, just about every time, somebody who comes in who places value on climbing a ladder or a title, or reaching a certain dollar value, dollar amount, that they don't, if they even make it in, they don't last long, because
that's a big
PD,
point. Yeah.
It's a huge point. And PD is not a place that you go to become director of anything. PD is a place you go to do really cool stuff with great people for a company that you believe in. I sound like a cheerleader. It's kind of, we all kind of are, but coming from an environment that was different than that was hierarchical, and, there were management levels, and I was on the track and blah, blah, blah. You see, you kind of get further and further away from the work, and you start to, having ladders to climb and things to do things like that to do tends to drive bad behavior in some people, where motivations could be less about authenticity in the work and more in, I need to achieve a certain goal. So that in itself, that whole notion of achievement of a structure or label or title, that's gone. And that really acts as a filter in some cases to people who want that, who seek that, don't think it's a good fit. And they're probably right. It's not.
I love that. This is a place that you come to do cool design. If you're looking for climbing the ladder, if your goal is to be director or something, this isn't the place for you. I love that attitude that resonates with me so much. Tell me, how do you keep people motivated? Or maybe that's not the right way to ask it. What is there for someone at PD to look forward to? Like, what's the next step? How do they grow into a new role, or how do people progress there? Or is that not even the right paradigm in which to think about PD's culture?
That's such a great question, because we get that a lot. People at PD are obviously motivated to do really good things, and people want to achieve things, and they a lot of people find value and worth through achievement. And so let me give you a specific example of a guy who I work with, who he's an industrial designer, very talented industrial designer, and he's also a musician. When he was working on a medical device program, and the notion of alarms came up, and I helped him understand that there's a pretty specific guidance on what alarms needed to sound like. And he was like, okay, cool, but I don't like these sounds. As a musician, these sounds they don't do what I think they're supposed to do. And obviously we're
Oh,
talking about
okay.
not non-critical alarms. No, we're not going to
Yeah.
change anything like that. But you start to get into the notion of sound design. And so this guy, Eddie Ganelin is his name, he just started on his own time to mess around with sound design. And, it is inspired by a passion he has outside of work, which is music. And we let him bring that into work and see if there's a connection to be made with that in the work that he does. And because of our notion of organic growth, we let him run with it, or he let himself run with it. I guess that's a better way to say it. We didn't let him do anything yet. He just did it. And because he was motivated and passionate about it, he came up with a really amazing, compelling examples of how this worked. I submitted it to, I think it was MDDI, and they loved it. And they published it. And then people started to call and talk about, well, what is this that you're doing? And then we started to be able to talk to people about our possibility to do sound design, or, somebody in, one of the human factors, people call it ear cons, or ways to help people understand meaning through the sound versus the icon. And because we are able to sort of follow these passions, we have had a number of really amazing projects that deal with sound design and continue to deal with sound design for the automotive industry, for the medical device industry, where people are coming to us because they are thinking about tones, non-critical tones and alarms, but sounds, integrating sounds into a system when somebody isn't able to actually look at the product they're using. They have to look somewhere else, augmented reality potentially, or some other, looking through a visor or some kind of camera. And so they can't see the screen or can't see the system. The only information they have is audible. And so how do you make tones and sounds mean something to them in a way that hasn't been done before? And Eddie grew this thing from a guy in a room who was having some fun to a legit business line. And it's still going. I mean, we have a sound lab now, and we are doing sound design for companies, and then we're doing human factors testing on the sounds that we're designing. So that's there's a number of stories. Soft codes is the same way. Digital knitting, that's the beauty of not having this sort of corporate structure where you have to ask for permission. You just are like, hey, I think this would be cool, and you are allowed to go follow that. It reminds me a little bit of Google's, what the famed 20% time, when you got 20% of your time to go do something. And, it's not that formal. Some people love to come in and they go to their desk and they sit and they crank out amazing work and they leave at 5:00, and that's fine. And some people come in and they just stay there and work because they love it. And everybody is content. And we don't have any specific way you have to be or have to act to be valued at PD. It's about how you contribute to the company.
That's fantastic. I love everything that you're saying, Reade. This is so great. It almost sounds like it's a company of entrepreneurs, might not be quite the right word, but me personally, I love creating something new. And I get bored when I have to do the same thing over and over. In fact, oftentimes, maybe not always to my benefit or to my team's benefit, but there's something that I really should be working on, but I've been working on it for a while, and it becomes stale. And I want to start something new. I want to start a new process or a new endeavor, a new effort, a new something. And it to me, that's what entrepreneurship is. And I love that. And it sounds like at PD, there's this internal, if not focus, at least support or culture that fosters people being their own entrepreneurs almost, within the society of PD. Does that explain it a little bit, or am I just way off here?
No, you're right on. I've heard people describe it as intrapreneur.
Yeah,
where you are, you're inside an organization and you're following kind of your own thought and your own idea. People who leave PD, actually a lot of them leave to start their own companies. There's a lot of side hustles going on. People that go home at night and they make art, or they print this thing, or and we've had, one of the designers we had a couple years ago, right when I started, he would make maps. He was a graphic designer, industrial designer, very talented. And he would make maps at night, come up with cool designs for maps. And it turned out to be, it was a hobby, and then it kind of grew a little bit more. And now, he left and started this company called Conquest Maps. And it's this nationally recognized map company where you buy the map and you put pins where you've been and where you want to go. I mean, he's killing it. He started at PD and he did it in his own time, and we let him. I keep saying we let him follow. It's like we didn't let him do anything. He just did it.
Yeah.
And this particular designer got to the point where he's like, I think I can make a business out of this. And we started to see him go, but it was really cool to see him kind of launch this. And that it's interesting that a number of people who have moved on from Priority have done so to start a company that I'll say incubated, for lack of a better term, while they were at PD. So yeah, and then there are people who, just like Eddie, he is able to connect his passion of music with his job, which is incredibly rare in today's world.
Yeah.
And we find, we want to make sure that people have that opportunity to do that. A recent example we had of, obviously with all the COVID stuff going around, we have a digital knitting machine in our office, and one of the mechanical engineering designers and the digital knit expert got together, and the team cranked out some mask designs, and we've knit 10,000 masks and distributed 10,000 masks to the community, because it was Hannes's passion was philanthropy. And we were able to make that connection between this, talking about skills volunteering. We have this machine that not a lot of companies like us have, a digital knitting machine. And we were able to make these masks, distribute them to the communities around PD, because it was a passion of Hannes and Wolfgang to do this. And we were able to, as a company, allow them and let them and give them the environment to do that.
That's phenomenal. I love it. All right. Well, I feel like I could just ask you question after question for days on end without break. This has been such a great conversation.
Thanks. It's been fun. I love it.
I have just two more questions for you. Hopefully not too long, but this is one that I ask everyone, and I think it's super useful for other engineering teams out there. So I ask it to everyone. What are a couple of your favorite vendors? Who are the suppliers that you really have found to be super valuable over the years?
From my perspective, it's been, because my background and recently, the team does a lot of research. For me, the vendors we use specifically as the research group are the other recruiters. The recruiters are incredibly important to find the right people for the right job, for the right test. We do a lot of medical, finding the right nurses and doctors has been invaluable to us. I'm sure that's probably not the kind of vendor you're asking for, but from my perspective, that was the first thing.
Well, maybe. And if this is like proprietary stuff, then that's fine and totally understandable. But I like to hear some names. What's a name that we can give the engineering community that they can go out and find on the internet and say, "Oh, cool, yeah, we could use these guys." Anything like
sure.
that you can share?
Sure. So, Schlesinger Research, I think that's how you say it. Schlesinger Research, L&E Research. We've used M3, Fieldwork. These are all great recruiters that we have used. And again, I'm just talking specifically from the research standpoint, but tying this back into the conversation, we have to find the right people who are going to be using these devices in the field. And these recruiting companies help us find those people, either in Columbus or nationally, globally. Help us find the right people, help us orchestrate. It's not an easy task to get nurses in Tokyo to come to a research facility in their spare time and run through a series of evaluative studies. So we rely really heavily on these recruiting partners. And it might be a little bit out of scope, or not out of scope, but out of frame for what an engineering team might be thinking. But to recognize that, these are going to be used by specific people, and you, the engineer, are very likely not the end user. And so you should really consider trying to find people who are your end user. If you don't have the luxury of internal experts or clinical staff or a pool of people around that aren't part of your company that will give you clinical feedback, then you're going to need to go out and find actual users. And from my perspective, in the work that I do and the team I work with does, recruiters as it's a critical vendor for us because we have to find the right people.
Awesome. I love it. Okay. Last question. What are a few of the biggest challenges that you encounter at work?
Lately, it's been actually being at work.
Because of the whole isolation. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Quarantine.
Yeah. We have, I've been back in the office, I think once since March 11th. we very quickly, I think quicker than we thought we could, became virtual. And by using things like Whiteboard and Teams and all the virtual tools we have, we are fully operational. The people who need to be in the building to run the machines are running the machines. They're there. And people who don't need to be there are not there because we don't want to jeopardize their health, ultimately the health of the company. So it's been difficult. It's been a little bit of an adjustment, but I think, it's been actually kind of cool to see how we are turning into a virtual company. That hopefully will change soon, and we'll be able to get back as a team. But it's sort of forever change that we're going to be able to work differently, and that's great. A lot of our clients are in the same boat, and so we're not unique in this space. So we're all sharing the same things, going through the same things at the same time. I think another thing, just from a business perspective, is the ever changing economy and what's happening. And as the market goes down, are clients are they going to jettison their internal R&D teams and rely more on consultants, or are they going to lock down and say, we want to keep our own people? We're going to not use any more consultants. Understanding that and understanding being able to navigate that landscape is important and a challenge that we see. The other one that we just talked about the other day is the whole notion of now with this whole post-COVID world, or not post-COVID, but post everybody locks down for COVID. How do we engage with our clients? How do we meet new clients? Trade shows and those things are pretty much dead for the next couple of years. So what are we going to do from a virtual standpoint to be able to introduce ourselves and get people to know who we are and why we do things and how we can help them? So those are some of the things that you sort of chew on as you're kind of going through your day. The other thing, another thing that we think about at PD is like we talked about a little earlier. How do you find talent, keep them happy, allow them to do great things, and now you overlay the notion of we're not all in the same building at the same time. There is a cultural aspect of that that's going to be diminished a little bit. I'm not going to say it's going to be going away, but I do have a little bit of worry about people, the social people who need that energy of others in a time when you can't. Is that going to help? Is that going to have impacts on them? So, but again, the beauty that I am seeing or have seen over the past 5 years of PD is that we are rather organic in how we operate. So we can kind of roll with the punches as we go. We also maintain consumer, industrial, and medical business lines or business units, if you will. We focus on those three areas. So when one's up and the other's down, we're okay. When one maybe recedes a little bit, we can push that energy into another one. We in the past, for example, have a lot of experience in consumer product design of hand tools. Well, if that diminishes, then we can probably move into more industrial and medical design of hand tools, because people in those spaces need hand tools, and we have expertise in design and development of hand tools. So it's just kind of a matter of staying up on the current environment, where we think things are going, and being able to put energy to see, does this make sense to put some people here? And, like Eddie, does it make sense to follow Eddie's path when it comes to sound design? And yeah, it does. And some things work and some things don't.
Yeah. Well, I love it. Some companies, I think probably, it was like you said, right? You have to have the right people. Some companies are not going to be able to work in such a kind of free-flowing organic manner, but I love that. I mean, that to me, that's the kind of place where that's my happy place, right? To quote Happy Gilmore.
Right.
All right. Well, Reade, how can people get a hold of you?
So probably the easiest way, you can send an email to me directly at Priority. So my email address is rharpham at prioritydesigns.com. Or you can just go to LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'm sitting at my computer 8 hours a day, so I'm sure I will see it. It'll pop up on my screen. But yeah, anybody has any questions or wants to learn more, I'm happy to talk in more detail.
Fantastic. Well, I've done about 25 or 30 of these podcasts so far, and there have been a couple where I felt like there was just this really good flow of energy back and forth. And for me personally, you might feel completely differently, but this has been one of them for sure. I've really, really enjoyed hearing about your experiences and about how PD works and operates, and just the whole thing was just a complete pleasure for me. So thank you so much, Reade.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I agree. It's nice to have sort of this common common theme and have an open discussion about it. So yeah, technical issues aside on my end, I appreciate your patience. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for this episode of Being an Engineer. Tune in next time. I'm Aaron Monker, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please leave us a positive review. It really helps other people find the show. To learn how your engineering team can leverage our team's expertise in developing turnkey custom test fixtures, automated equipment, and product design, visit us at testfixturedesign.com. Thanks for listening.